Hey folks, it's Ray at DCRainmaker.com here, and today we got our first look at Wahoo's new roller. Though first look is a little bit tricky, we got a lot of looks. We got a lot of looks over the last 3 days on the UCI Worlds in the individual time trial. Wahoo had basically a booth there, a warm-up area, a common warm-up area right ahead of the time trial starting gate where they had all these units on display. Except one little catch. Wahoo actually hasn't announced the roller, not yet anyways. In fact, they've said nothing officially on it, on any of their social media, any press releases, anything like that. They just were like, here is a warm-up area. Athletes may use it, and that is that. Now, of course, that makes things like this video a wee bit tricky. I can't use the UCI footage. If I do, I get like rights issues. It's a big mess. Instead, though, I found a photographer that went there and took some photos, and I've got his permission to use his photos of this setup. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna talk about what is in there, what we're seeing, before I can eventually talk about this like with an actual hands-on review and all that kind of stuff whenever it is that happens. So as the name implies, this thing is a roller, but not like a traditional roller. It's not like a kind of a wider roller drum. It's a shorter roller drum. If you look closely at it, you can see there are two rollers in the back there. In the wheel, the rear wheel sits between those two rollers, basically just kind of free floating there. And then off to the side of that, interestingly, is a flywheel. So most rollers don't have a side flywheel. Instead, the inertia is within the roller drum itself in some capacity. So this is interesting to have what looks like almost a mini kicker flywheel there onto the side of the unit itself. In fact, on top of that kicker flywheel, you'll notice that there are two little icons. One is for the AMP Plus logo, one is for the Bluetooth Smart logo, just like on a traditional Wahoo trainer. And each of those has an LED next to it. And if you go back to the end of the picture in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see there is a power cord plugged in there. And you can actually see in a different photo that the power cord is unplugged as well. So you appear to be able to use it both unplugged as well as plugged in, which is common for some kind of smart roller type situations, and even some trainers in general. For example, the Tax Neo series can be used both plugged in and unplugged. There are, of course, reductions in capabilities when you have it unplugged. We'll have to see how that works down the road with the actual Wahoo roller itself. Speaking of which, that is the name, not just because it's on the side of the product, but also because that is a single thing or one of two things that Wahoo would confirm when I asked them. So it is called the Wahoo roller. Oh, and just a quick note, if you're finding this video interesting or useful, just hit the like button at the bottom there. It really helps out this video and the channel quite a bit. The next thing, as we slide forward on the unit, you'll notice there's a small clamp that then goes in between the rear portion and the front portion, because there are two portions to this. The rear portion is where the rear wheel sits, of course, on those two roller drums next to the flywheel. And then if you go all the way forward, you see that's where the front wheel sits as well. In fact, there's kind of like a little groove, a valley that the front wheel can sit in. And I presume that that entire front assembly slides forward and back with that locking clamp that you see in the middle, roughly underneath the bottom bracket of the bike. On that front wheel stand, you can see there's a clamp at the very top of it that would allow the front wheel to be kind of clamped tight. And it prevents the front wheel from going anywhere and provides stability. And of course, the rear wheel can move left and right on that small little roll area because it's not actually locked into that. One thing that's not super clear from the photos is whether or not that front end is height adjustable or not. In fact, if you look at this photo here, you can see that her aero bars are very, very close to the top edge of that front end assembly. And it doesn't appear as though any of the front ends are any different. And in the half a dozen or so units that Wahoo had there, in every single photo I saw, the front end was exactly the same height across all of them. And given hundreds of riders had gone through there, I would assume people would have dorked to them at some point. So my guess is that's not adjustable, and that could be problematic for riders on a smaller bike, for example, 650 wheels, that might not have the clearance there with aero bars. In a standard road bike configuration, of course, that is actually behind that front wheel kind of center point, so there shouldn't be any issues there. This would purely be like an aero bar concern for smaller bikes, smaller riders. That said, having used rollers before, and more importantly, setup rollers before, this looks like a little bit easier system to get the alignment correct because you're just placing your wheel in that rear pocket and then the front wheel in the front pocket. It should be much easier just to like use that clamp and move them exactly where you need to be, as opposed to trying to balance all this stuff correctly on a pair of rollers without anything to hold the bike up. Inversely, at the back end of things, it gets a little bit trickier because of the fact that the rear wheel is not locked onto that wheel. In other words, I can pick up that rear wheel off the rollers like this and drop it again. There's no locking of that, unlike a traditional trainer. That means that power accuracy is going to be much, much tougher for Wahoo to overcome. In every roller configuration I've tested, there is no such thing as an accurate roller because of the fact that they don't know the actual press-on force. In other words, how much resistance is on the wheel itself, so it's really hard to estimate power without that. Now, it's possible Wahoo has overcome that, or it's possible just simply sidestepping that. we'll have to find out later on that. Speaking of things we'll have to find out later, I've got a bunch of questions. And so these are things to kind of contemplate. Number one, when will it be properly announced? Now for that, actually, I do maybe kind of sort of have an answer. I got a single line quote from Wahoo on this, which is when I asked them what it is, and they said, quote, "The Wahoo KICKR ROLLR is a new product we are developing and testing with the help of the UCI and the athletes participating in the Road World Championships this year in Flanders. We don't currently have a set release date for the final product, but expect it to be in the later part of 2022. So that answers the when. The when is sometime next year, which then gets the next one, which is cost. What will it cost? We don't know that. I can't imagine this will be super expensive because I think that it just doesn't make much sense. But I can't imagine it's going to be cheap because it's Wahoo, right? Nothing's cheap from Wahoo. So I can't imagine to be like any more than the price of a KICKR Core. At the same time, I don't think it'll be like $300 either. Number three, will it be compatible with the Wahoo KICKR Climb? For example, the Climb goes up and down. Can it be combined with that in some way, shape, or form? Is there any adjustability to the front wheel portion, like I mentioned? What portion of it requires power? In other words, we saw it used both with and without a power plug, but what do you lose if you don't use it with a power plug? And then does this have some sort of alternative battery capacity within it? Is it resistance controllable? I know that might sound like a silly question for a Wahoo trainer, but can you control the resistance with it, like the incline or simulating in Zwift or an erg workout? Is that actually resistance controllable? I would assume so, given the flywheel that's there, but I've long learned not to make assumptions. Does it transmit power? Another, you would assume so, given it's a Wahoo trainer of sorts, but maybe not. Maybe this sits like the Feedback Sports unit does. Feedback Sports Omnium, for example, that doesn't transmit power or anything like that. It's just purely like a non-smart sort of unit. Number 8, 9, something, 9, I guess, 8, I don't know. Does this mean we're not getting a KICKR 2021 this year? Number whatever I'm on now, does it work with a mountain bike? Will a mountain bike fit on that front wheel portion in particular, as well as the rear wheel portion? That may not matter for a lot of people, but it might matter for others. And then lastly, what does the inertia feel like? So does it have good ride feel? That's something that typically you don't get great ride feel from rollers. So it's a question of how well that works as well. Now at this point, I don't have any answers on any of those things for today's video, but eventually down the road, I probably will have some answers for you. That's why you should definitely hit that subscribe button at the bottom, or just simply whack the like button as well. That really helps with the channel. With that, thanks for watching. Have a good one. There is plenty more sports technology stuff coming up. September, October are usually pretty good times for sports technology, and I think this year will be no different. With that, have a good one.